we should give young people choices. What kind of life do you want to live? Do you want to stay close to your family and friends? Because you might need them when you start a family, for instance.
I think what we really need to do is to enthuse all the generations and the political conversation around a new conversation about what a successful life really means in the 21st century. And I think that we're so stuck in old models of consumer society, biggering, make more money, have more money in your bank account. Philip, you've been really interesting on how success is not the kind of digits in your bank account. And as we all know, all the research shows that after about £50,000, more money doesn't make you happier anyway. There's a real kind of, it flattens out. So how do we start having that different kind of conversation about what a successful life looks like? And what does that look like for you?
Now, how many eulogies have you been to where the priest or the vicar or the rabbi has said, this guy ended up with £10 billion in the bank account. Shouldn't we all applaud him? It's not true.
No.
I've never been to one because it's not what people aspire to. Yet that's the way we live. So you live all your life with this vision, and then when you die, you say, "Oh, I got it wrong."
Yes.
Because what it's about healthy relationships. I was watching Yes Minister recently, and there's a funny line where the minister's wanting to make redundancies in the department, and Sir Humphrey says, well, in business, it's in the markets, it's all about accumulating money in your bank account. But here, it's about the number of people I'm responsible for. And it shows it does work. People do care for other people. In the civil service, where it's not been about money, even though that is to an extent changed, they do look at in terms of how many people can look after. So I think we have to start thinking, do people really need another £1 million? Or do they need to actually show that they can help? Once they met my needs, and no question, my needs should then become your needs rather than my needs becoming my wants.
I think
and we have to start that conversation.
And Imogen, what do you see in your work? What do you think for your generation or for you? What does a successful life look like? What are the ingredients?
In my work, both main parties for ages and ages, years and years, have been talking about social mobility. And I think that when they say social mobility, what they actually mean is geographic mobility. What they actually mean is the earning power is down in the southeast. So to get on and get up is to move down to the southeast. But that's geographic mobility. That's not social mobility. Social mobility, I think, is much broader than earning power. And that, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying everyone should stay where they are. I'm just saying we should give young people choices. What kind of life do you want to live? Do you want to stay close to your family and friends? Because you might need them when you start a family, for instance. Loads of people my age down in London, nowhere near their friends and family. So when baby number 1, 2, 3 comes along, they're really struggling for any kind of wraparound support. And so I think we need to be having a much more holistic conversation that, as Philip says, is not about how many digits are in your bank account. So I think we need to be concerned for the people that, frankly, A, don't want to move down to the southeast, and B, for whatever reason, can't. Not everybody wants to or frankly can access those kind of higher education institutions.
And I think we need to unpick that a bit, because I think what you mean by moving down to the southeast is basically buying into a capitalist agenda of you go to university, you get a degree in the kind of thing which will make you the most money, and then you come down to London and try and make as much money as you can, and that is the only way that our society shows of being successful. Or you become an influencer, or you're Andrew Tate style, you have all these cars, and that's meant to mean that you're having a successful life. I think what I see in the young people around me is that they are increasingly switching off from that, that they are not particularly interested in consumer stuff. They all buy kind of their clothes recycled off things like kind of Vinted or Depop. They're quite anti the idea of that kind of consumerism. They're not necessarily bought into that capitalist structure, and yet that's what we're selling them. And I think there's a real opportunity here for a whole new political discussion about what makes for a happy life. I mean, I've got to 52. I know that what makes me happy is the quality of the relationships that I have, both with my friends, with my colleagues, with my community. I love it that when I walk out of my door, and I live right in the middle of inner city London, that I know most of the people in my community because my children went to local schools. I know the lady lady in the local shop. I know the lady who lives in the local flat. She used to run the community group that we went to. I feel really dug into a community, and those are the things that make me happy, and the flourishing of that community. But we don't hear about that when people talk about what successful lives look like. I mean, for me, it's about the amount of kind of love and support and the flow that you have with other people, where you give things out and you get things back.
Yeah.
So I think what's really required is a new political conversation which looks at what really makes us happy, and it seems to be very far from what we've got at the moment.
I've been involved in a conversation in policy kind of circles for some time around beyond GDP.
Yes.
Government loves to measure its own success by GDP, but your average Joe, us three here sitting on the sofa, I don't think we do measure our own happiness or contentment or well-being. There's a really important discussion about well-being. What makes people feel well, and often, I mean, there's David Cameron did start this, did you call the happiness index, trying to measure well-being. People that have strong networks, social networks, are happier, and that's really, really important. That will prevent you from getting sick and depending on expensive acute health services. That will stop you from, developing unhelpful behaviours, again, that are costly to the state, be it alcohol or drug addiction. So the government and all political parties and all decision makers just need to see that there's a much bigger conversation that's beyond GDP, and actually call it well-being, call it happiness, call it whatever you want. But these things in the long run, it is a long-term conversation, will save the state masses and masses of money if people are happy and well.
So, Philip, in your ideas around covenant, you talk about different kinds of systems that would help support the family. You have this idea of kind of family business. Tell us a bit about how that supports this idea of what a different kind of successful life might look like.
Yeah, I think in this conversation, we mustn't only talk about people. We've got to remember Mother Earth. It's real. The world in which we live actually gives us food. It gives us oxygen to breathe. It actually sustains us, and it's a real being. And we forget, we've fallen out of love with the land. We've all, and the villages that used to be based around farming and agrarian, where actually people would actually plant food and start to love the earth, has been completely destroyed by huge commercial organizations that destroy that option which used to be there of living in a village where you actually worked with the family on the land and loved the land and built, the land could trust you and you could trust each other. And I think we forget about not just global warming, it's actually what we're doing to the planet, to the earth, where the biodiversity, the number of different grains we're just destroying them. We're producing more and more. So we have to look at almost the ideal, which is not leaving home as an empty nester, but actually building from the family to the community, to the nation, and the ideal being a loving family, not financializing everything, financializing the house, financializing GDP of the nation, financializing the land. Everything's about money, and we forget it's the means, not the end. So we have to revisit, as you say, what the fundamental purpose and meaning of life is, and it has to be. And you speak to people who've got billions, they'll say, "I'm not happy." Most of them are not happy, but no one's talking about it because everyone looks at, I don't know, social media, says, "Wow, what a wonderful life, yachts and garbage." They're not happy, they're lonely.
No.
A yacht is a very lonely place.
I think that what makes us happy is connection to each other, connection to the land, connection to a sense of seasons and things changing and our place within that system. And the whole political edifice, the money, the debt, the whole way that everything's organised, it serves to sever connection and take people away from each other, away from the land, away from their communities, rather than reinforcing all the things that people can do if they're taught to value connection. I mean, if we had a society which looked at the kind of bonds between us as the most important things, that was really our capital rather than digits in the bank, I think we would be in a much better place. And it seems to me, is what you're trying to do with this covenant idea.
Absolutely right. It's about education. And it's interesting, you talked about the law not working. The law doesn't work. It's very simple. And again, the Bible can teach us how to do it, because the Bible is about narrative. There are stories. And the beauty of the Bible is that everybody needs to understand the law, because you need to be able to lead a meaningful life. So the last thing you want is a enforced centralised system via courts that tries to force people to be virtuous. Not going to work. What you need to do is educate people, tell them the stories, start to discuss what we really want in life. The emotional stuff, which is, I love my family, I love the community, and start to work together so that the system enables people to make it happen themselves without the need from such. You talked about it earlier as well, that we the leader is somebody who's worth 100 billion, and it's got lots of. Those are not people that we should be modelling.
No,
those are not people who are living the ideal life. It's not like that. So we need to change the models, and we need to look at harnessing the 5 masters. In each case, we could discuss each area, but what is the new vision of the state? What's the new vision of the market? What's the new vision of land ownership and responsibility? What's the new vision of money? And what's the new vision of technology? It's too long to go into each area, but each of those areas has to be visioned in the light of a new narrative, which is the narrative you describe, which is we want to build loving relationship, which is the covenant concept. And then what does it mean? And we get that ready and get people engaged in very simple terms, avoid the jargon, get rid of these gatekeepers, lawyers, accountants. We don't want those to get people, women, children, young teenagers, get them engaged in a conversation about what we actually want.
You know, I think that's really true, and I think that recasting politics in that mode. So we say can see that we're in a system and a situation which is not working on all of these levels, where our young people feel massively disenfranchised from the system and like it's not working for them. So how do we set up a new kind of world on a different set of values, and what might that look like? And I have to say that I don't think our political masters at the moment are doing that at all. Rishi Sunak's 5 big promises didn't say anything about climate change. They didn't say anything about levelling up, which is really the agenda which is behind this. And
did talk about family and love.
Well, at the end, I mean, he but not actually as part of any kind of policy or how he might actually support the family. And he's busy walking away from everything that he might be doing to support kind of extra childcare or some of the things around family, which actually might be helpful.
The problem is that we live in a world of predict and control. Rishi, I'm not blaming him, but he's trying to set a set of expectations that
so low
that he can achieve it. And he thinks he'll win the next election. He won't.
No,
because we're beyond this predicting control. We need to move to sense and respond. To actually thinking the human metaphors. Forget about. In fact, we all use the words of levers. Those are we're in a world of mechanical metaphor. We need to start moving to human metaphor, to living organisms. We all do it. You keep thinking about gearing and all this kind of stuff, but there's no vision.
No, and there's no hope.
There's no hope. There's no vision. There's no hope.
I think hope is the kind of key ingredient, because when I talk to the young people, they just don't really get a sense that things can change. And I think that a politics which starts from a hopeful point of view. I mean, it's why Boris won, actually, with the levelling up. It's why Obama won in America. It's about giving people a sense that there is a hope for a society which can be better. And to be fair to political systems, they have delivered better societies. I mean, I think that, if you look at kind of Attlee or what happened here after the Second World War, there was a sense that we moved to a fairer society where there was healthcare for all and homes for heroes and, lots of those things. And I think what we need now is a similar kind of reset where we go, the current system that we've got is not working. What do young people want? What do we need to set our youngsters up so that they live in a world where we don't get climate change, where they can afford to do the things that they want to do, and that we remodel around connection?
Just to briefly stick up for Rishi. His job, we came from it was chaos before Rishi, and what he's done, I know that it's short term and absolutely we need a bigger vision, absolutely we need to instill more hope. He has steadied a very rocky ship. And that was important just for the kind of state of the nation. But it's
kind of lowest common denominator, because we had a woman who was completely nuts,
right?
Who had got voted in on a conservative agenda, which was about as extreme as anything that we've done. I mean, my background is I'm the former editorial director of the Sunday Times. I've sat in numerous comment meetings and discussions with all sorts of columnists and politicians. And even within that establishment, Liz Truss was seen as a headbanger and Kwasi Kwarteng. Yeah. We would quite often get kind of, policy see articles from them, and we'd all go, "Oh crikey, do we have to take one from one of the headbangers? They were the Tory headbangers." I kept trying to explain this to people during the Liz Truss leadership.
It's crazy.
contest.
I'm the same.
It was crazy. It's
Everybody knew.
Even right wingers thought they were extreme.
Everybody knew this was going to be crazy.
Yeah.
Yet for somehow the system. I just don't know.
Well, because it was a total failure of democracy.
No question.
They were voted in by a tiny number of Tory members who we know skew that way, and there's always been a faction in the Tory party who believed in a kind of Ayn Rand kind of, back to basics, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, Atlas shrugs kind of world where the survival of the fittest, Hobbesian, everyone else went to the wall, and that's what they were about.
Experiment didn't work, but I think we can learn from it. I think Truss thought that her job was
hopefully that we never get that kind of neoliberal view of what happens in the UK ever again.
This idea that a centrally managed fiscal tweaks here and there, a bit more than tweaks, can solve all our problems.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not the answer. For sure.
It's definitely the answer. But I think what it does tell us is that there was all this conversation around how she spooked the markets because she wasn't properly engaging with them. So that's state and markets not properly engaging. I think there's an interesting story that needs to be told, and we need to remind ourselves that often I think the state seeks family life, that's a private issue. Free markets, that's a private issue. I'm not here for kind of endlessly more state intervention, but the state, I think, should be confident in saying, actually, we need to have a conversation about these things that successive governments have considered private, family life private, free markets private, can't do anything about this, that or the other. And actually the state should be thinking, in my view, government should be thinking, the family, the community and nation. These are the fundamental associations that make people happy, safe and free. So the market ought to be serving those ends. The state ought to be serving those ends.
Yeah, but what's happened is that that's not the case. So the state has actually intervened to take a lot of family life away. I mean, I'm very exercised, say, around sex education in schools. But it seems to me, why should schools be responsible for having those kind of conversations about morals, about sexuality, about some of the basic tenets of being human? Why are we contracting out to a whole load of teachers things that we should be talking to our children about
100%.
ourselves and modelling for them? The same with childcare. Okay, great, if you're a woman and you want to go out to work, and now you have to go out to work because you need two mortgages to you need two people to pay the mortgage. But why should the state be responsible for looking after our young children? Why isn't that a kind of family decision? So I think in a way we've got the worst of all worlds. We've got the market having taken over everything and commoditized everything from childcare to healthcare to our houses. And we've got a state intervention which doesn't work, which drives people to do things that they don't really want to do and to feel like they no longer have any agency over their own lives or solving their own problems.
I think the trust issue was a failure of both the market and the state.
Yes.
How could the state appoint somebody that people knew was going to be a disaster?
Yes.
That's a failure of the state.
Yeah.
And then how can the market come along and take out a prime minister in 40 days? That is absurd. But that's what we live through. It's crazy, but both are failing. And if you don't realise that, then you're living in a different planet. Both are failing.
And I think actually the reason why Truss got in was because there is a sense that the system is broken. And so there actually was an appetite for something a bit more radical or a bit out of the box. I just think it was a disastrous experiment. And what we need is a much more centrist, sensible, kind of loving, connection-based new kind of hope in politics, which comes out of solving some of the problems that we can see in all our young people and throughout society.
Elle's perfectly articulated contract culture, outsourcing responsibility to the state, and everything's commodified. That's contract culture.
Yeah,
it's not about building relationships and associations.
Education has to help us educate our kids, working together, not outsourcing it. So they have to help us with their expertise so that we build a relationship with the kids, and we've got to educate the kids with the help. Everyone's working together. It's not competing.
But for families to be educating their kids, there need to be strong, stable families, which means that the government has to support mums or dads, if they would like to stay at home and look after their own children, support them to do that. So there's a weird kind of sequencing, choreography, chicken and egg thing here. We want less state in our lives, but we need the state to to enable and encourage and strengthen these fundamental associations such that we can stand on our own 2 feet as families and communities in a nation.
I'm very aware that we're also moving towards another election. So, you know, you've been you're both part of kind of formulating policy. I've had a ringside seat on talking to endless cabinet ministers and kind of policies and what's going to win elections. What I'd like to come to both of you on this. What are the kind of key things, key elements that should be part of a winning pitch for the next election, whichever side you are on?
Look, I think Rishi must be able to see that he's still 20% points. Besides, he has stabilised it, but he's not winning.
No.
And therefore, he's almost on a hiding phenomenon. I think he's a perfect job. He's a very bright, brilliant man. He should actually say, well, and he's also someone who makes his own mind up. If he gets the right people in front of him, says, look, how are we going to win the next election, which is what his priority is at the moment, and what do people need? And if he starts this conversation, starts to engage people in a hope, in a discussion, Eleanor, that you're talking about, what do I actually want in a meaningful life? And people start to realise he actually is connected. He's got a wife, kids. He actually is a family man, and we start to get that conversation going. And there's hope. We can reignite hope around a discussion of those 5. What's the future of the state? How does the state look? How can we build trust in the state? How can we build trust in the market? How can we build trust in ownership of land? How can we build trust with technology? And how can we build trust with money? Start that conversation, the 5 masters, and he'll win the next election if he does that.
No, I think that's. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think I do agree. I mean, Boris Johnson won an election with enormous success in 2019, and I think Boris has had his day probably. But what he did do is talk. He was unapologetically proud of the nation, Britain. And I know that a lot of young people cringe at that and go, "Oh no, you know, is that feels or sounds too much like nationalism." But for goodness sake, you know, we should be proud of the place that we live, and we should be wanting to see our towns and our villages thriving, and for families to be playing meaningful roles in those towns and those villages. So I think an agenda that does kind of borrow, if you like, from Boris's playbook, I think is an important one. Call it, you know, Disraeli had this phrase one nation conservatism, or whether Labour want to pinch that from the Conservatives. They already have done, in fact. So Keir Starmer, you know, in his speech a couple of weeks ago, talked about, okay, we've taken back control from Brussels. Not that he was a leaver, but now we need to take back control from Whitehall. And I think that story of empowerment for local people to be more in control of what happens in their area, in their communities, I think is a total vote win. We'd often talk about in Westminster the community power agenda. We want communities to have more of a say over their place, the place that they live, and I think I'd love to see, yes, more of that, please.
I mean, we know that Dominic Cummings, for all his faults, was a master strategist, and that slogan, "Take Back Control," resonated. I mean, for me, I'm not a Brexiteer, so it was using "take back control" in the wrong context. But I think take back control in terms of local communities, and I think also using technology for this kind of, there's this new phrase in the corporate world of glocal, which is kind of global and local, and using technology to really empower communities to make decisions. I was at Octopus Energy last week, and they were talking, they've got a whole map of all the places in the UK where people are asking now for onshore wind turbines because they can have cheaper energy if they have a wind turbine in their village. So suddenly all that NIMBYism has turned into, please give us a turbine, because then then we'll have
turning the NIMBYs into YIMBYs.
Exactly. But that is really, I actually sat there in real time, and they have a grid and they can see all these applications coming in. They've got a map of exactly where in the UK there are people who want these wind turbines, and exactly where they could look like and where they could be plugged into the grid. That is all completely possible. Yeah. So it's those kind of policies which somebody like Rishi could take up, because it is quite technical, and say this is a real opportunity for a local project which will benefit local people, also does the right thing by the planet because it weans us off the big enemies we've defined today as the kind of, the fossil fuel, whether it's the kind of coal or gas, and all the people who are taking all the money at the moment in the energy crisis, and really creates a local solution to that which works in a more macro way. So for me, I think what the politicians need to do is to really zone in on some practical, possible things which technology can bring about,
Yeah.
and which
Yeah.
would make life better for everybody. And I think it's also, for me, I'm a storyteller, so for me it's always about hope. It's how can you tell a story of a Britain where things are getting better, which has more of the things that we all love and less of the things which aren't working, and that a politician who taps into that, and I think Boris was clever at that, will do well. And I don't, for me, Keir hasn't really started articulating that kind of enthusiastically enough.
I think it's absolutely right. Both of you are talking about the story. Rishi, tell a story.
Yeah.
Get people engaged. Stories combine emotion with reason. Stories, it does both, and it communicates with people. Tell a story, get people ignited, and you'll win.
Yeah, a story is the most powerful thing in the world. And I think that what you're trying to do, Philip, very effectively with your covenant idea is to tell a new story about what might be possible and how we might get to that place, which is actually very practical and grounded in some really interesting principles. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.